Rose as latest figures showed that South Korea's economy continued to slow. Investors, meanwhile, look ahead to the European Central Bank. Mainland Chinese markets moved to a subdued finish. The Shanghai Composite closed flat while the Shenzhen Composite declined 0.21%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index bucked the trend, jumping 0.77% in its final hour of trade. Japan's Nikkei jumped 0.55%. To the United States now, where stocks edged higher on Wednesday as investors look past lackluster quarterly reports from industrial bellwethers Boeing and Caterpillar through a lower than expected revenue outlook from Texas Instruments sent chipmakers shares lower. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 0.1%, the S&P 500 gained 0.28%, and the Nasdaq Composite added 0.19%. Let's get some more market news for you now. We cross to Nastasia Arendse, who is standing by at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Very good afternoon to you, Nastasia. What's moving the markets this afternoon?
Good afternoon, Singer. As you mentioned, Asian markets closed higher, and of course this as the S&P managed to close above the 3,000 psychological level. This despite those weak numbers out of Caterpillar and Texas Instruments. Elsewhere over in Europe, of course, investors are waiting for that ECB decision out of Mario Draghi. They're not expecting any new changes. They do expect him to continue reiterating that the the Eurozone economy is under pressure. We are also waiting for a decision from the European Union with regards to the Brexit extension. Elsewhere, locally, we've got numbers out of Clicks, as I mentioned, and of course, Altron also releasing their figures. But let's have a look at the globals picture just to see how some of the markets, or rather the news coming out of the markets, is affecting. Well, joining me to unpack the markets a little bit further, I'm joined in studio by Gebran Smith from NEFG Fund Managers. Gebran, thank you so much for your time. So let's look back at the week that was, I suppose. I know it's Thursday, we still have to get through Friday, we're waiting for the ECB and various other things. So far, JC activity?
Yeah, look, it's been quiet. There's not much numbers coming out. It's not earnings season. The states are starting with their earnings season. As you mentioned, there was a few bigger companies reporting yesterday. But not too much movement on the markets. Very quiet. I think everybody's waiting for some direction with Brexit at the moment. Certainly the hottest topic for the week. And then probably after that you'll have trade wars, which has probably been around for some time now.
Right. So, I mean, we had Clicks release their numbers this morning, and one of the things they mentioned is that they're planning to spend around just over 780 million rand on stores, and this, of course, to build market share. Let's talk Clicks. Is that a stock that you particularly like, and how would you rate it, I suppose, versus a discount?
Yeah, look, I think both those companies are probably trading at a bit of a premium against the market. They are certainly delivering the goods at the moment. Clicks has been spectacular over many years. You could just see today's numbers again. The growth is in double-digit territories, and it's been continuing from quite some time as well. The only problem here is probably what you pay for some of these companies, and yeah, I think you're paying in excess of a P of 30 for some of these companies at the moment, which is probably very expensive if you're a value investor. But it's been one of those brilliant South African stories. It's just worked. Everything they've done, management's been working well, business has been working well, and they're certainly returning the numbers for shareholders over time. All
right. Sometime this week we had Naspers Process announcing that they want to make a play for Just Eat, which is in the UK market. However, you know, just depending on who you speak to, some might be a little bit fearful of going into the UK, given what we've seen out of Famous Brands and True Words and some of those who may not have necessarily succeeded. Are you seeing opportunity in the UK despite Brexit uncertainty still, you know, dominating headlines?
Yeah, look, I won't say that's a cheap acquisition. I think if you do the numbers on it, it boils down to about a 90p. But we know those companies just turned around. It's actually just started making money in the last year. We know it's a very hot topic. There's lots of growth with the new generation coming on. They're probably going to order more food online, etc. So I'm probably too blind to understand some of those valuations that people do pay on some of those tech stocks, but in the context it looks like cheap. In that type of context, for us it looks very expensive, but in Brexit as a whole I think there's lots of opportunities in the UK. Probably after South Africa, one of the best value propositions out there.
As someone in the industry, I mean, how do you avoid not playing into, I suppose, the fanfare of very high valuations, particularly for some of these tech companies, as we've seen with WeWork, where it didn't quite pan out the way it's supposed to? And one of the biggest, scariest news, I suppose, was that, Wall Street was ready to push this out into institutional investors had the IPO actually gone ahead.
Yeah, the crazy part is maybe they will put into lecture books, etc. When we read back 20 or 30 years from now, and my kids will probably hopefully read it, that this was probably the turning point in some of these valuations. They had a $47 billion valuation on this company, and after a bit of homework and rejection from analysts, it seems that the company at the moment is only worth about $8 billion if you look at the deal that SoftBank has done in the week, acquiring some more shares. So very difficult out there. Probably avoid some of these expensive shares is probably the best advice at the moment.
Okay, cool. So in terms of news or themes that you think will actually dominate global headlines for the rest of the week, what are you keeping an eye on? I know the ECB president is expected to announce his last monetary policy announcement. From your perspective?
Yeah, I think the Brexit and what they will, if they would only give a short-term extension, if that is possible, then I think the markets will probably be positive on that.
And your risk factors for this year, have they abated? I mean, I know you don't pay attention to a lot of the things happening in the global space. You focus on company fundamentals and perhaps some of the things that matter. Have those risks abated a little bit on a scale of 1 to 10 where they're sitting right now?
Now, look, I think from a macro perspective, there's probably more risk out there at the moment with trade wars, recession fears. I think recession fears have come in, which is probably a new one after all the trade wars and the Brexit fears, etc. But I think if you look at valuations, and it all depends on what you pay for an asset, that's probably the risk that you have of losing money. I think shares is probably local market. It's probably gotten less expensive, more cheap, and so the risk is probably abated.
All right, Gerbrand, let's leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. That is Gerbrand Smith from NEFG Fund Managers. We're going to take a quick break, and Nompumelelo and Nzinga will be back after this with more of your news.